He looked me straight in the eyes, sitting on the exact couch where we'd once planned our entire future together, and said the sentence that ended 6 years of marriage in under 4 seconds. I can't keep pretending anymore. Your sister is the woman I actually want. I had a positive pregnancy test hidden in my nightstand drawer at that exact moment, a surprise I'd been carefully planning to reveal on his upcoming birthday, a list of 120 baby names already saved in a note on my phone that I'd been adding to for weeks. I wiped my eyes once, took a single, steady breath, and answered him with 4 words I didn't fully understand the weight of until considerably later. Then go be with her. My name is Rosalind Ferris, I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of the year that followed that sentence, the miscarriage that came 2 devastating weeks later, the gym I built from a cleaning crew job I took out of sheer desperation with nowhere else to turn, and the exact moment, roughly 14 months after he walked out our front door for the last time, that my husband stood up at his own first anniversary party, announced my sister's baby wasn't biologically his, and turned to tell me, in front of every single person we'd ever known, that leaving me had been the biggest mistake of his entire life. What he didn't know, standing there in that crowded room, was that I was pregnant again, engaged to someone else entirely, and that I had already, quietly and methodically, made absolutely certain he could never touch a single thing I'd built without him. I need to take you back to the 6 years leading up to that couch, because you won't understand exactly how much I'd already given before he ever said my sister's name out loud with that specific tone in his voice. Marcus and I met in community college, both of us broke, both of us working 2 jobs simultaneously just to cover tuition, and I fell for him during a period of my life when raw ambition felt like the single most attractive quality a person could possibly possess. He talked, back then, about everything he wanted to build, and I believed every single word of it, the way you believe things at 23 when you've never yet had a reason to doubt someone completely. I worked considerable overtime for years so he could finish his degree without taking on crushing debt, covering rent, groceries, our modest car payment, everything, while he focused entirely on his studies. I put my own plans, and I want to be honest that I did have considerable plans of my own once, an entire life I'd once imagined for myself, on indefinite hold, telling myself, the way you tell yourself things you're not yet ready to fully examine, that this was simply what genuine partnership looked like in practice, that his success now would eventually, naturally become our shared success later. We spent nearly 20 months trying to have a baby together, IVF rounds that left my body exhausted in ways I couldn't fully articulate to anyone outside that experience, and left our bank account thinner every single time a cycle failed. Each failed attempt was a private, specific grief I mostly carried alone, because Marcus recovered from disappointment considerably faster than I ever managed to, moving on to the next distraction within days while I sat with the weight of it for weeks. I remember, specifically, the particular loneliness of those months, lying awake beside a man who had already, apparently, mentally filed away our latest failed attempt and moved on to worrying about work deadlines, while I was still turning over every possible explanation for what my own body might be doing wrong. My younger sister, Brianna, was, by every visible external measure, everything I genuinely wasn't. A fitness influencer with a considerable, devoted following, a college degree she'd finished without ever needing to work a single job alongside her studies, a body she photographed in bikinis several times a week for an audience that adored her completely and unconditionally. Marcus liked every single one of those photos, without exception, appearing in her comments section with a consistency I noticed, quietly, for months before anything else actually happened between them. I noticed the specific attention he gave her online, attention he had, somewhere along the way, stopped giving me in person, and I told myself, the way you tell yourself things you're not ready to fully confront, that it was harmless, that a simple like on a photograph meant absolutely nothing at all. I want to be honest that I saw other signs too, in retrospect, details I filed away without examining closely at the time. Brianna suddenly finding endless excuses to invite Marcus to work out alongside her. Brianna hiring him, specifically, to replace another photographer during one of her fitness shoots, a decision I remember finding slightly odd at the time but never once questioned directly. The night everything ended, I discovered I was pregnant only 3 days earlier, and I was sitting across from Marcus on our couch, quietly working up the courage to finally tell him, when his phone lit up with Brianna's name on the screen and he answered it, without any hesitation whatsoever, right there in front of me. I don't know exactly what she said to him during that specific call, since he'd stepped just far enough away that I couldn't make out her actual words, only the low, steady rhythm of his responses. I only know that when he finally hung up, he looked at the television for a long, uncomfortable moment before speaking, and even then, he still didn't look away from the screen to face me directly. "Brianna and I talked," he said, his voice carrying an odd, careful flatness. "She's just better suited for the kind of life I actually want." 6 years. 6 years of overtime shifts and putting my own future on indefinite hold and countless IVF treatments that had cost me considerably. More than money, and all of it, apparently, meant absolutely nothing the moment my own sister whispered something sufficiently convincing into his ear. "Then go be with her," I told him, and I remember, with real clarity, the specific look on his face when I said it, genuine surprise, as though he'd fully expected me to fight, to beg, to fall apart in some dramatic way that would let him feel appropriately, comfortably guilty about leaving. "Wait, you're really okay with this?" he asked, sitting up straighter now, finally looking directly at me. "Don't you love me?" I told him the truth, because I understood, even in that exact moment, that the truth mattered more to me than managing his feelings ever again. "I do love you," I said. "But obviously my love isn't enough for you anymore. So pack your things and leave." That same evening, less than 2 hours later, he left our apartment to meet Brianna at one of her scheduled photo shoots. The next morning, he came back only to collect the remainder of his belongings, her hair tie still wrapped casually around his wrist, her lipstick smeared unmistakably across his neck, smelling exactly like her specific, expensive perfume. We'd been sleeping in separate bedrooms for weeks by that point already, and he still, somehow, had lied straight to my face right up until the exact moment he no longer needed to bother lying at all. Less than 20 hours after that, my own mother called me, her voice bright with a specific, entirely oblivious happiness that I still, even now, struggle to fully process. "Did you hear the news?" she asked, practically bubbling with excitement. "Marcus and Brianna are finally together. Isn't that wonderful?" Apparently, 6 years of marriage meant absolutely nothing at all once my own sister decided, quite simply, that she wanted him for herself. "Don't worry, sweetheart," my mother continued, entirely missing the specific, devastating silence on my end of the line. "I'm sure you'll meet someone else eventually. Brianna's just hard to compete with, honestly." I wanted, in that exact moment, to scream that I was pregnant, to make both of them understand exactly what they had helped destroy through their careless, casual celebration. Instead, I quietly ended the call and focused every remaining ounce of energy I had left on simply protecting my baby. 2 weeks later, I lost the pregnancy. The doctor explained, gently, that severe stress combined with complications during implantation had most likely caused it. That was, without any real competition at all, the single lowest point of my entire adult life up to that moment. The following Monday, driving home from a temporary shift I'd taken simply to have somewhere to physically be during those difficult days, I passed a neighborhood gym with a handwritten sign taped crookedly to the front door. "Cleaning crew wanted, no experience necessary." My entire future had already, thoroughly collapsed by that point, so I pulled into that parking lot without giving the decision much conscious thought at all. The owner, a retired female bodybuilder with a personality every bit as formidable as her physique, looked me over carefully, smiled, and said, "You look like someone who could solve half her problems with a decent six-pack and some serious glute workouts." For the first time in months, I actually laughed out loud, a real laugh that surprised me as much as it apparently pleased her. She hired me on the spot, no formal interview beyond that single, unexpected exchange. Something inside me slowly, gradually began healing once I actually started working there. Surrounded by weights and barbells and the specific, rhythmic clang of equipment, there was no Marcus, no Brianna, no parents celebrating a fresh engagement as though I had simply never existed in the first place. There was only the gym itself and a specific, quietly growing determination to rebuild something entirely, unmistakably my own from the ground. More than money, and all of it, apparently, meant absolutely nothing the moment my own sister whispered something sufficiently convincing into his ear. "Then go be with her," I told him, and I remember, with real clarity, the specific look on his face when I said it, genuine surprise, as though he'd fully expected me to fight, to beg, to fall apart in some dramatic way that would let him feel appropriately, comfortably guilty about leaving. Wait, you're really okay with this? He asked, sitting up straighter now, finally looking directly at me. Don't you love me? I told him the truth, because I understood, even in that exact moment, that the truth mattered more to me than managing his feelings ever again. I do love you, I said. But obviously my love isn't enough for you anymore. So pack your things and leave. That same evening, less than 2 hours later, he left our apartment to meet Brianna at one of her scheduled photo shoots. The next morning, he came back only to collect the remainder of his belongings, her hair tie still wrapped casually around his wrist, her lipstick smeared unmistakably across his neck, smelling exactly like her specific, expensive perfume. We'd been sleeping in separate bedrooms for weeks by that point already, and he still, somehow, had lied straight to my face right up until the exact moment he no longer needed to bother lying at all. Less than 20 hours after that, my own mother called me, her voice bright with a specific, entirely oblivious happiness that I still, even now, struggle to fully process. Did you hear the news? She asked, practically bubbling with excitement. Marcus and Brianna are finally together. Isn't that wonderful? Apparently, 6 years of marriage meant absolutely nothing at all once my own sister decided, quite simply, that she wanted him for herself. Don't worry, sweetheart, my mother continued, entirely missing the specific, devastating silence on my end of the line. I'm sure you'll meet someone. To me for the very first time since he'd originally left. I saw on Instagram you're a personal trainer now, he wrote, the message arriving late one evening while I was still covered in drywall dust. Trying to become another Brianna isn't going to make me want you back. I never bothered answering him at all. While he wasted his own time trying, apparently, to insult me from a distance, I was riding across town with Ranata that same week to meet a small group of investors who'd agreed to help finance the equipment for my new gym, people from her own considerable social circle who eventually put together $120,000 combined so I could purchase the best equipment available anywhere in the entire region. When the gym finally opened its doors, more than 600 members signed up within the very first 6 weeks alone, a number that genuinely surprised even the more experienced people helping me run the place. Within 4 months of opening, the business had already generated $40,000 in clear profit. When I eventually showed Ranata the actual numbers, sitting across from her in my small, cluttered office, she simply stared at the spreadsheet for a long moment before speaking. You've accomplished more than any shallow influencer ever will in her entire career, she said quietly. Your sister is still making money by showing off online for strangers. You actually built something real with your own 2 hands. Not long after that specific conversation, invitations arrived for Marcus and Brianna's first wedding anniversary party, an event I genuinely hadn't expected to be invited to at all. My parents practically begged me to attend, insisting, repeatedly, that Marcus had something important he specifically wanted to say to me. I showed up, eventually, with Owen. He was Renata's nephew, an Olympic weightlifter, tall and quiet and genuinely, visibly admiring of everything I'd managed to build out of nothing over the preceding year of my life. We'd been engaged, quietly and without any real fanfare, for 3 months by that specific point. I want to describe, in some detail, the exact expression on Marcus's face the moment he first saw us walk into that room together, because I've turned it over often in the time since. Between Owen's calm, solid presence, my own clearly visible pregnancy, and a particular, settled confidence I now carried into every room I entered, I watched Marcus understand, in real time, exactly what he had thrown away so carelessly. Brianna was pregnant too, as it turned out, though unlike me, she looked utterly exhausted, hollowed out in a way that clearly had nothing to do with simple physical fatigue. She pulled me aside quietly before the formal toasts even began, her voice shaking noticeably. Please help me, she whispered, gripping my arm with more urgency than I expected. Marcus knows. Before she could explain anything further, Marcus stood up at the head table, tapped his glass with a small spoon, and the entire crowded room fell completely silent almost instantly. Brianna's face lost every trace of color right in front of me. Everyone, Marcus announced, his voice carrying loudly enough that I could hear every single word clearly from across the room. The baby Brianna is carrying isn't mine. I'm infertile. Which means she's currently pregnant with another man's child. Then he turned, slowly and deliberately, to face me directly in front of every guest present. "I still love you," he said. "Leaving you was the single biggest mistake I've ever made in my entire life. I'm never letting you go again." He started walking toward me, slowly, purposefully, across the crowded ballroom floor. I stepped backward twice, my own hand instinctively moving to cover my belly, the way pregnant women protect themselves without even consciously deciding to do so. Owen stepped calmly forward beside me, not threatening Marcus in any visible way, simply making it unmistakably clear, in the plainest possible terms, that I wasn't standing there in that room alone anymore. Marcus finally, fully noticed my own visible pregnancy in that exact moment, and I watched his entire expression shift rapidly from raw desperation into confusion, and then into something I genuinely couldn't name even now. Owen squeezed my hand once, firmly, reminding me silently of the promise we'd made each other during the drive over that evening. No matter what happened tonight, we weren't going to let my stress levels rise for our baby's sake. I immediately began the specific breathing exercises I'd learned in prenatal yoga, 5 seconds in, 7 seconds out, counting silently, and I felt her flutter inside me right in that exact moment, a small, grounding movement that steadied my entire nervous system almost instantly. Marcus reached toward me, mumbling something about needing to talk privately about our shared future, about us as a couple. I noticed, distantly, at least 2 guests already recording the entire scene on their phones. I kept my own voice calm and level, told him plainly that if he ever needed to contact me again, it would need to happen through text messages or emails only, and only ever regarding strictly legal matters going forward. His face collapsed visibly, as though I'd physically slapped him across the room. I didn't particularly care. I wasn't going to risk my baby's health or well-being for a scene he had chosen, entirely on his own, to create in front of 200 witnesses. Owen and I turned together and walked steadily toward the exit at an unhurried pace. Brianna stood near the doorway as we passed, mascara streaming visibly down both cheeks, desperately trying to catch my attention one final time. I never once looked directly at her. I want to explain, in careful detail, exactly what I did that same night once we finally got home, because it mattered enormously to everything that unfolded over the following several months. The moment we walked through our own front door, I opened my laptop immediately and began writing down every single detail while it was still completely fresh in my memory, building a complete, carefully dated timeline documenting exactly who had said what and precisely when each specific thing had happened. I understood, with a clarity that genuinely surprised me given the emotional weight of that entire evening, that whatever came next in this story was going to require careful documentation, not raw, unfiltered emotion. Owen made me chamomile tea without being asked, brought it over in my favorite mug, and kept our remaining conversation deliberately light for the rest of that evening, discussing nothing more complicated than the next day's class schedule at the gym. I went to bed earlier than usual, though sleep barely came at all that particular night. The following morning, my mother called, insisting, once again, that I needed to hear Marcus out properly for the sake of our entire family, that this was all simply one enormous misunderstanding that could still, somehow, be fixed if I was only willing to try harder. I told her, calmly, that I needed to get back to work, ended the call, and refused to let another one of her familiar guilt trips affect me the way they once reliably had. That evening, after the gym had closed for the night, I sat alone at my desk and typed out a message to Marcus directly. I kept it deliberately short, respectful in tone, and impossible to misunderstand or misinterpret later. I explained clearly that I was only willing to communicate about any remaining legal matters connected to our divorce, nothing personal whatsoever, and that every future conversation would need to happen strictly in writing from that specific point forward. After pressing send, I opened each of his social media profiles in turn and blocked him completely across every single platform I could find. Within days, a thick, unfamiliar envelope arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize at all. Marcus's attorney was formally claiming that he might be legally entitled to a considerable portion of my gym, arguing, in careful legal language, that because I had technically started working at the very first fitness center while we were still legally married to each other, my business somehow qualified as shared marital property under the law. Panic hit me hard for one brief, genuinely frightening moment before I forced myself to breathe deeply and switch entirely into problem-solving mode instead. I immediately began searching for a forensic accountant nearby who specifically handled exactly this kind of complicated divorce case involving disputed business assets, and found a careful, thorough man named Mr. Whitfield with an opening available that very same afternoon. I spent nearly 3 full hours that day gathering absolutely everything I could find: bank statements, incorporation paperwork, lease agreements, investment records, documentation proving exactly when I began working at that first gym and precisely when I had officially, legally opened my own separate business. Whitfield reviewed every single page carefully, making copies, highlighting important dates, asking pointed, specific questions about the considerable inheritance I'd received from my own grandmother that I'd later used as part of the building's original down payment. After nearly 2 full hours of methodical review, he finally leaned back in his chair with a small, confident smile. "Honestly," he said, "Marcus's claim doesn't have much of anything real to stand on here." He explained, patiently, that almost everything connected to my current business had clearly happened after our formal separation, and that the paperwork itself, dated and verified, supported that entire timeline completely and without any ambiguity whatsoever. I retained a professional mediator rather than heading straight into full litigation, understanding, through Whitfield's careful guidance, that a documented, properly structured process would ultimately serve my own interests considerably better than an emotional, unpredictable courtroom battle ever could. Over the following several weeks, through multiple separate mediation sessions, Marcus gradually, visibly stopped fighting the established timeline once he fully understood exactly how thoroughly it had already been documented against him in writing. My own accountant discovered, during that same process, 2 entirely forgotten joint accounts still technically linked to my name, one holding just $18, the other holding $37, and we closed both of them immediately, opening brand new accounts entirely in my own name alone going forward. We also signed a formal financial freeze agreement, specifically preventing either party from moving assets or making major financial decisions during the entire evaluation period, and I finally slept soundly, for the first time in many difficult months, without constantly worrying about hidden accounts or unexpected financial surprises waiting to emerge. I want to describe, briefly, exactly what happened with Brianna during this same difficult stretch of time, because it eventually added an entirely unexpected layer to this whole story that I genuinely hadn't anticipated at all. During one specific mediation session, she finally broke down completely and admitted that the baby's actual biological father was a photographer named Trevor she had been quietly working with on a regular basis. The formal paternity test confirmed this with near total certainty several weeks later. She and Trevor, to my own genuine surprise, eventually worked out a remarkably mature co-parenting arrangement together, considerably better, according to our own mediator, than many other couples she'd personally handled in far less complicated, less publicly humiliating circumstances than theirs had been. Marcus's attorney eventually sent over a formal settlement request, asking for $60,000 specifically for what he described as his own emotional investment in my personal and professional success over the years. My accountant laughed out loud, actually laughed, reading that specific request, and quickly prepared a thorough response using every single piece of documentation we'd already carefully gathered, definitively proving there was absolutely no financial or legal connection whatsoever between Marcus and my established business. He eventually, reluctantly accepted a token goodwill payment of just $4,000 in exchange for permanently, legally waiving any and all future claims to my gym or any other asset I personally owned. His hand shook noticeably signing that final page of paperwork, but he ultimately signed every single page without arguing further. For weeks before my actual due date, I went into sudden labor while teaching an early morning spin class. One of my own longtime members, who happened to work as a nurse, recognizing the specific signs well before I fully did myself. Owen drove me carefully but quickly to the hospital, stayed remarkably calm throughout nearly 9 full hours of increasingly intense labor, and at exactly 4:12 in the morning, our daughter was finally born, healthy and strong, weighing 6 pounds and 14 ounces. Owen cried openly for the very first time since I'd known him the moment she wrapped her tiny fingers instinctively around his. I think often, still, about that specific couch, about the cold, sudden clarity of the exact moment I told Marcus to simply go be with my own sister, understanding, even then, in that devastating moment, that some quiet, resilient part of myself already knew precisely what I was fully capable of building once I finally stopped waiting around for anyone else's permission to begin building it. I think about the specific weight of that first year, the concrete Floor I slept on without heat, the canned food, the 60-hour weeks that eventually, slowly turned into something genuinely mine, something no one, including Marcus, could ever take away from me again, no matter how much he apparently wanted to once he finally understood exactly what he'd lost. If this story reached something real in you tonight, if you've ever had someone try to walk back into your life the exact moment they finally saw you thriving without them, I want to hear about it honestly in the comments below. Tell me exactly where you're watching from, and tell me honestly whether you think I handled that anniversary party the right way, walking out calmly instead of giving him any kind of scene at all. And if this story reached something real in you tonight, don't just close this video and move on to whatever comes next in your feed. Subscribe right now, because there are more stories like mine waiting here for you every single week, stories about exactly what happens when someone finally, quietly stops waiting for anyone else's permission to build a life entirely their own.